Jodi Krangle, welcome to the Brand Retro podcast. I appreciate you coming on this morning.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to see where this conversation goes. I know a lot of what you talk about on your podcast and the different things that you kind of educate us on is the fact that audio branding's a thing. It matters. It helps connect people to the brand. So before we jump into the deep end of the pool on that topic, tell me a little bit about what you do and your background. I thought your background was pretty cool, and it kind of spoke to the importance of some of these branding things that I don't think a lot of people take into consideration, and they don't give it as much, clout as they need to.
Yeah, well, my background is in voiceovers, so that's really how I got interested in all of this. I am one small part of that audio branding umbrella. And if people don't give enough thought to the voice that represents their brand, they're missing out on the whole audio branding thing, right? Because the voice you use, just like the music you use, the sound effects you use, anything that you use that's audible in your branding should reflect who you are as a brand. So it's a marketing and advertising and branding thing that people should be paying more attention to. And when I got interested in it, I just wanted to know more. So in November of 2019, and I've been a voice actor since 2007, full time. So that's what I do all day, every day. And I wanted to ask questions of the people who hire voice actors, why they hire voice actors of a certain type for their business, and what considerations should go into that. But I also wanted to talk to audio branding companies. I'm not an audio brander myself. That's not what I do, but I talk to people who are. It made a lot of sense to me what they were talking about.
So what we do is we work with brands on the look, the feel, the visual, the creative, that kind of stuff. But I always kind of stress that follow through of the copy that's being used, the voice and the tone of how you pitch your message, how you sell your services, those kinds of things. And when in the position to find a person like yourself where we try to decide what does this brand's voice sound like, I've always stressed it because I know the importance of it. And I think that if you do it consistently and over time, whether people realize it or not, that voice burns its place in their brain. And all of a sudden it's like that brand is associated to that voice or vice versa. But what I found with clients is they want to somewhat blow it off. And they're like, well, does it really matter? I mean, can so-and-so do it? Or in a lot of cases, the client themselves just wants to do it. And I'm not against that if they can do it correctly and they can do it in a way that's fluid and speaks to the brand and stuff. But it just feels like a lot of times it's one of those missing links or one of those misunderstood elements of like really good branding that it's just not quite at the level it needs to be yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into that. And I mean, as a branding person, basically this is marketing 101, right? Like you have to know who you are before you can make the appropriate visuals and audio to represent who you are. So this is important. And it's important that the two things match each other, because if they don't, there's a kind of disconnect and people don't understand why they don't trust your brand, but they don't trust your brand. And also sounding professional is just as important as looking professional. Also keep in mind that audio is stuff that seeps into our background no matter what we're doing. So you have to focus entirely on something that's on video and your eyes are engaged and that's what you have to look at. You can't do other things while you're watching a video. But while you're listening to something, you can do multiple other things. And our lives right now are so multi-purposed. There's so much other stuff going on in our lives that having a medium to reach people with that seeps into all the little corners while you're doing other things, that's gold. You're missing out on having good audio and getting into the little bits and pieces that are left of people's lives.
Yeah.
So it's more important than I think people think.
I totally agree. And I think it's one of those things that if you can be intentional with it and you can be strategic with it, it's one of those things that even though it's a subliminal type delivery, it's one of those things that can really connect those dots and make an impact. Because you think about some of these, these major brands or these voices that you've heard over time there's really no replacement for them. And the minute that you hear them, you know what it is. Like the one that pops into my mind is the guy, I can't remember his name, but the guy who does the voice for Optimus Prime on like the Transformers cartoons and movies.
Yep.
That guy's voice it's gold, and it's like it's literally its own thing. And I can't imagine somebody else trying to step in and do that. Now, when they started that whole journey back in the early 80s, did they really think that that voice would be such a resonant piece of that brand? I doubt it. But now that we're 30 plus years in the future, it's huge, and it's a huge staple and a foundation piece of the Hasbro / Transformers brand.
It is. And people, they're emulating it. So instead of him having to do it all the time, they have other people who can do the same voice. It's like there have been other Looney Tunes characters, right? The original, we know who the original is, but he's long gone, unfortunately, brilliant as he was. So now multiple people have to take over those voices. And, that's just how it's been. That's how things happen. But when you're talking about audio branding specifically for advertising, the reason that this has become so incredibly powerful is because of consistent repetition. So if you're thinking about this in terms of how memorable it is, then if you started an audio brand 20 years ago and you hear it multiple times consistently, the same sound, people remember that. That's why jingles are so wonderful for that kind of thing. You remember the tune, but you remember the lyrics because of the tune and because you hear it so often. And part of the reason why the Optimus Prime voice is so incredibly powerful to a lot of us who grew up in that era is that you heard it consistently every Saturday morning, right? Like this was something that you heard all through your childhood. That's why I remember the jingles, like the Intel, da 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 da, like that. We heard that on every commercial for 25 plus years. At the end of every tech commercial. And they did something brilliant. They bought and helped finance advertising for other brands and then had their stuff tacked on the end. But they were the consistent repetition in that whole algorithm, right? So them that you remember, I don't remember all of the tech stuff that they were on, but I remember them.
They definitely took that spot at the end and really used that spot to ingrain themselves into people's memories.
The reason that those things become so popular is because they go on for such a lengthy period of time. So if someone is looking for an audio brand now, they need to start ASAP because they're going to get the benefits of that audio brand 20 years from now.
So how do you, when you're doing what you do and you're working with clients, when you're working with maybe those who don't, appreciate the value of something like that, how do you educate them? How do you help them understand how important those details are?
I tell them to listen to my podcast. That's why I made it.
Right.
That's what it's for. But yeah, I understand why brands don't consistently use the same voice all the time unless it's a character. I understand that, but they should at least stick with the same type of voice for a certain period of time. If their brand represents a certain thing, then they need a voice that represents that certain thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same voice, but it should be a voice that represents their brand in the same way that their logo does. Right. Visuals are the same way. And if you're going to change your visual, then maybe you change your audio to go along with it. But these are what I would call refreshes. They're not what I would call like complete, because you're going to confuse your clients. If you've been one way for 20 years and all of a sudden you decide, oh, I'm going to go in another direction. You're confusing people.
And I've advised clients in a similar fashion on music choice. If they're doing certain kinds of music montages over a video or something like that, it maybe doesn't have to be the exact same piece of music, but it should be very similar. It should have the same tone. It should have, a resemblance to each other so that consistently people are starting to do the math on, who you are and what you sound like, even if it's subliminal, because that's the part I think sometimes, gets lost in this, and the clients sometimes think that there's thought that goes into it, and it's like, well, not necessarily if it's subliminal. I'm not saying the clients don't eventually recognize it or your potential customer doesn't eventually recognize it, but at the beginning, it's all very subliminal and you're just absorbing it as you go. And then it's, on that third, fourth, fifth, 100th time, whatever it is, that's when the light bulb starts to flicker and you're like, hey, I know that brand.
Yeah, yeah. But here's something else to keep in mind as well. If you're going to create like a 5-note mnemonic or something like that, there needs to be some kind of reasoning behind it. There needs to be a why. What does it represent? What sounds are you using? What notes? Are they major or minor keys? Is that in keeping with your brand expectations and who you are as a brand? Is it happy and joyful, or is it more somber and formal, And these are things to keep in mind. You can't just create a musical identity or an audio identity in general, because it's more than music, and expect it to stick. Because if it has no reason for being, it's not going to stick. No one's going to remember it. So if it truly represents you, then yeah, that's awesome. But if you're a high-end jewelry store, don't have 80s hairband music on your on-hold. You know what I mean? Like, it's just that simple.
Right. It needs to connect back to the authenticity of your brand and who you are, so that somewhere in this journey, somewhere in the experience, it all clicks. Like you mentioned, if you're a high-end jewelry store, not having 80s hairband as your on-hold music, unless it somehow connects back to your brand and you're having some kind of an experience inside your store, or
totally.
But those
if you
are all
have
things
a cool
consider.
Jewelry store, okay, maybe. Yep. But these things generally don't go together.
Yeah, it depends, but it's about connecting those dots.
Like you say, if it's who you are, awesome. That's fantastic. But yeah, it should have some bearing on who you are. It shouldn't just be, oh, I like this music, or, oh, Barry in accounting can do a really good voice. He'll be great.
Yeah, and that's honestly probably what happens most of the time.
Yeah.
Or that's at least where they start.
It is all about being true to who you are as a company, which, that's why I can sort of understand why the owners of the company sometimes want to be the voice.
Yeah, it's just whether or not they have the voice, right?
Yes.
If they can
exactly
fluidly read the script, or if they can follow because I do have some clients that they get camera shy, or they get, you put that microphone in front of them and they just can't execute the line.
The voiceovers are harder than you think.
Absolutely. And there's a little stage fright that comes into some of that when you get the client in front of the camera or in front of the microphone. So what do you think the major things to think about are for a company or a client who's looking to do something like this? I think for me, it's just to kind of give you my position on it. For me, it's like those details all matter, regardless of whether it's the creative, the visual, the sound, the smell. I mean, I remember working in retail. We used to pump smells into different aspects of the retail location, and that was all intentional. It was part of the brand. It was part of burning that experience into their head so that they knew that smell associated it to retailer X.
Multi-sensory. So that is a fantastic idea. Yeah.
It's those details, right? Mm-hmm. How do you coach these people through this process and help them understand, like, here's the 1 or 2 or maybe the 3 things that are the most important to think about?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm not in the audio branding realm, so I don't actually tell people how to do that. I direct them to people who do, and I know several people who do that all over the world, actually, through the podcast, which has been enormously helpful. But one of the first things that I would say is know who you are, because you can't get any of this right unless you know who you are. And it may not necessarily be what you personally like, because you want that Venn diagram that meets in the middle between what you like and are happy with and what your clients want and are happy with, because it's not all about you. Right. If you want to actually sell what you have to offer, you have to appeal to the people who would buy your product, not just yourself. Right. Although often... you are you are often the person who would buy your product, but you got to keep this in mind.
Yeah, and not to interrupt you or sidetrack you, but before you go on, I just want to make note that that is one of the greatest points that anybody can keep in mind is you create your branding, you create your creative, your brand, your look, your feel, your sound. You create it for them, not you. And yes, there's a lot of you in it, but just remember, it's not all about what you like. It's about what they like. It's about what they respond to.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really important. If you figured out what your visuals look like, then think about what emotions the audio should evoke to match that visual. Because really, when it comes to audio, it's all about the emotional context. Like if you think about it, this is the way that I usually use this example. You are watching a movie and you've turned off the sound. So you'll get what's going on in the movie. You will see what's happening on screen. You'll understand the plot probably, but you won't care, right? Because it's the music that gives you the emotional intensity of the scene. It's the music and the sound effects that draw you in, that get you emotionally invested in what's going on. So you can see something and it's beautiful and it may speak to you in a way, but without that audio component, there's no emotional intensity. There's no deepness of feeling, if I can put it that way. Yep. And for me, that's the important part, because really as consumers, we don't buy based on logic. We buy based on emotion. And then we justify it with logic.
Right.
That's how it happens. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting point, because that movie example you just mentioned, there's how many times have you been sucked into a movie and there's background music and there's a theater element that's kind of taking the intensity up a notch, the drama up a notch. And it's not that you don't hear it. It's that you don't necessarily recognize it as separate because you're immersed in the experience, right?
Yeah, it's not separate. That's exactly it.
Same difference.
Yeah. And you'll notice sound that is out of sync. You won't notice sound that works. It'll be unconscious and it'll influence how you feel emotionally, but you won't notice really what it's doing until it doesn't work. So that's the weird thing about it. Yeah.
If you took like a really intense movie or a scene from like from Pulp Fiction and dropped in some Looney Tunes music, it would completely blow the whole thing to pieces.
It changes scenes.
It would definitely change everything.
Yeah. But I mean, like, for instance, I know for me, like, a moving commercial can make me cry. I'm bad that way, right? But it's always the music that gets me.
Right.
That's what has me, like, bawling, right? Like, I can't stop myself. And movies do the same thing to me. So, yeah. So for me, I mean, and not everyone reacts as strongly as I do. I totally will give people that. Like, some people are more audible oriented than others. But at the same time, without the full experience, and even what you were talking about, piping in scents, people, when they're selling houses, they bake bread in the oven, right? Like, why do they do that? Because our senses work together to really give us the context of what we're experiencing, to give us a well-rounded experience. And the more well-rounded your experience is, the more you're going to connect with the company. And connection is what, it helps. It's not the be all and end all, but it certainly helps make sales, because the whole know, like, trust thing, right? And again, this doesn't necessarily equate to loyalty. Let's put that out there, but it certainly gets people to consider you seriously to start with, and maybe be loyal for at least a while.
Yeah, well, I would even add to that a lot of entrepreneurs, business people, whatnot, they react from instinct. They react from gut feeling. They react from how they felt about that experience. And if you layer in those details, whether it's the smells, the sounds, whatever it is, you're going to be engaging that gut experience to be like, wow, that was a great meeting or a great experience, whatever it is. And to your point, yeah, loyalty, it might not kick that off, but it's going to get your foot in the door so you have a chance of building loyalty.
Yeah,
And if
definitely.
you can play off of that and give them confidence in the experience from those details, that's gold. It's hard to quantify that as a marketing person. How do you play to people's instincts?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure, but if we do all of these things, there's a chance we're going to win more than we lose.
Yes, you'll have a
So,
much
so
better
let's
chance.
let's
Exactly.
give ourselves the best chance possible.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I am not, I'm probably one of the people that sort of isn't really someone who believes in brand loyalty, because I think that it goes only so far. And if a better brand comes along that happens to have a really good audio brand,
Yep.
you might well lose out, you know? It's all about what that company can do for its end user. And
I was just going to say the same
yeah,
thing. Like I am a believer in brand loyalty, but it needs to be backed up by the product, the experience, the whatever. So
exactly.
it's a double-edged sword. So yes, brand loyalty is a thing. I believe in it, but if you're not doing all those other parts, it tears apart. It gets fragile real quick.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's switch gears just slightly. I want to talk a little bit about your talent. What brought you here? How you got to be doing this? I think the idea of being a voice actor or being a sound brand voice expert, I believe is something a lot of people think, well, how hard can that be, right? And I've been around it and I've dealt with
Yeah.
it and I've worked with those people. I definitely believe it's harder than people think it is. And even from starting my own podcast, if anybody's listened to all my podcasts, I'm going to apologize for probably about the first 5 or 10, because
Oh, same with
even
me.
I was, yeah, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I can talk people's faces off if I'm comfortable, but when I started my podcast, it was strange for a while. It took me a while to become, I don't even want to use the word comfortable, but not weird. It just took me a while to
Weird. I
not
love
sound
that.
like a weirdo when I was recording it. Maybe the listeners couldn't tell, but I could tell. Let's talk a little bit about the talent and kind of what goes into this. How do you switch gears? How do you, when you have to play one role versus another, excitement versus sad, like if it's a bank versus a, restaurant, just kind of talk through what kind of skill and what kind of personal navigation goes into tapping into those talents.
Well, I will say that I started out in this business as a singer, not an actor. So I hear beats and notes of scripts. And so, I mean, obviously coaching is key as well, because I did have a lot of coaching, and that's where the acting came in, because this is actually acting. And the reason that it's acting is because you are basically in a room by yourself, sometimes with headphones on, sometimes not, with a microphone in your face and a script in front of you, no one there, no one to talk to, and you have to sound natural. So it's the most unnatural environment that you could possibly find yourself in, and yet you have to sound like you're talking to your best friend. Right?
Right.
So these kinds of things are it definitely it's putting you in your own head. You are making a scene in your mind's eye, and you're playing it out, and it's coming through in your voice. And I will say that when I'm recording a script, if I'm not having a live directed session, I won't have my headphones on, because you can hear the resonance of your voice in your own head when you're with microphones on your head. And I find that I sound much more natural without them, because it's just me talking. Right. So
Right.
that is one really big hint, I will say. Unfortunately, when you're interviewing someone, you kind of usually have to have headphones on. So that can be a bit of a problem. But I do solo podcasts as well that are like 5 minutes long. And those I just speak without headphones on. So it really can work in your favor if you don't use them. But the difference in tone between, say, a bank or a furniture store, let's say, like high intensity selling of a retail product, as opposed to being a professional, even authoritative kind of person that you would trust with your money. These are definitely different characters, but at the same time, it's all still me. So one of the things that I had to learn early on was, this is me with this different type of infused personality, with this different type of attitude. with this different type of emotion. And speaking the script and looking at that script and understanding what words do they use? Do they use contractions? Do they not use contractions? Do they manufacture a product that is geared towards scientists or geared towards a kid who wants a new pair of jeans? Like, these are completely different attitudes, right? So a lot of the hints are in the script, is what I'm saying. There is a lot of experience that comes into this. I mean, I've been doing this now 14 years full time. So you understand who you are better as you grow into it. And now I know pretty quickly whether a script would work for my personality, for who I can be, as opposed to maybe a script that I should leave to someone who's 30 years younger than I am. You know, there's differences. I tend to be asked to do a lot of healthcare, finance, insurance, and some high-end sales reads like furniture stores and department stores and stuff like that. And tourism. I used to do a lot of tourism before the whole pandemic thing. And I hope to get back to that because that is a lot of fun. I love doing that sort of thing. And casino work, oddly enough. I used to do a lot of casino and I still do, but it ramped down during the pandemic and now it's starting to ramp up again. So, but yeah, there are certain things that my voice fits well for. I am not urban and cool. I am not, and I never pretended to be. So anyone who wants like a Nike commercial, they're not coming to me. But I know who I am, and that's fine. So
Right.
know who you are. That is, you know, like you would with audio branding with a company. Know who you are and why you're doing what you do.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have to steer into your niche, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. I mean, we have, certain industries that we do work for that I don't know that I would have picked those industries or found myself by choice going that way.
But it's who hires you.
When it works, it works.
Yeah.
And after you do so many, you kind of come to the realization that I think we're pretty good at this industry.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know that I would have picked this one, but whatever. So we just steer into it. And so, Jodi, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me a little bit about this.
My pleasure.
I said, the details that go into branding, whether it's the sound, the smell, the creative, whatever it is, all those details add up to a very strong brand representation. And I think it's important that people realize that audio aspect is huge. Right?
Oh, yeah. And becoming bigger all the time. This is the thing, right? I think this is an aspect of branding that has been sort of left by the wayside it was really important up until probably about 20 years ago. And I think people just sort of got so caught up in the visual aspect of things that they left the audio by the wayside, and it was quietly still going on in the background. But I think now it's starting to take center stage a lot more because of people's split attention, right? We're multitasking constantly now because of the internet and everything that it gives us. And audio is getting into those little cracks and crevices in a way that not a lot of other mediums are able to do.
I think podcasting and video is dragging the audio back to relevance.
Yes.
Like I think about, not to sidetrack us again, but
no, it's
I think about like those, when radio was your only form of entertainment, people would sit and listen to, episodes of Little Orphan Annie or Superman. Like that was its own thing, and those voices all mattered. And then over time, like you said, it became commercials. It became, maybe certain voices on TV shows, radio shows, whatever. But as social media and all those things started to explode, I think it took a back seat for a while. And now that podcasting is becoming such a huge thing, video is, everybody's trying to produce video for social media, for their brands. I think it's becoming that much more important again, that consistency matters. There was a phase in that whole thing where I think being inconsistent and being organic was super cool, and it's
that's why Joe Rogan, right?
Right.
I
think the pendulum has come back around.
Yes. Yeah.
And now we're starting to remember what made these things great from the beginning, and it was
and all sorts of audio theater. Like all of that is coming back, right? In podcasts, there are now
Right.
story podcasts, right?
Right.
There's a whole bunch of stuff going on out there that is becoming more and more prominent because podcasts are giving the radio people, the people who would normally be listening to radio, a way to sort of listen to it on the go, in between things, instead of having to tune in at a particular time. And it's more than just music, obviously. So talk radio is becoming podcasts.
Like, I think it's giving businesses, entrepreneurs, and people that have that skill a lot of opportunity.
And there are a lot of branded podcasts too.
Absolutely. I think that organic message and the way some of these brands are getting themselves out there and sharing their message, I think it's just so transparent, and that's what makes it so powerful. Jodi, I'm going to cut myself off here. Thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And if you're open to it, I'd love to have you on again.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
If you'd like to learn more about CyberDogs, share your thoughts, or even ask a specific question about this episode and or the brand Retro Mindset, contact me directly at mike@cyberdogsmarketing.com.